Good evening. My name is Don Hannon, and I'm the Acting Executive Director for the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. I'm honored to welcome you to the second program in the Why This Matters speaker series. Thank you to everyone who joined us last week for defining anti-Semitism and why it matters. If you missed that program, it's now available in its entirety on our museum's YouTube page. At the heart of this series is the museum's mission to use the history and lessons of the Holocaust to reject hatred, promote understanding, and inspire change. The Why This Matters series demonstrates why the St. Louis community has so strongly supported the museum for over 25 years and has helped make its expansion a reality. Each of the programs in the four-part series will cover issues central to the work of the museum, including tonight's presentation on the vital need for Holocaust education. Each day, our museum team works to bring impactful and engaging Holocaust education programs to students in St. Louis, the state of Missouri, and beyond. Our new museum, opening in the summer of 2022, will allow us to bring these programs to an even wider and more diverse audience. Now I'd like to introduce Dee Dee Simon, the chair of the Missouri Holocaust Education and Awareness Commission. The commission has been a valuable partner in our mission to bring Holocaust education to the state of Missouri. We are honored that Dee Dee has agreed to introduce our speakers for tonight's program. As a reminder, if you have any questions for tonight's speakers, please utilize the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And now I will turn things over to Dee Dee Simon.
Thank you, Don, and good evening to our viewers. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Missouri Holocaust Education and Awareness Commission, it is a permanent commission that was enacted by the Missouri General Assembly in 2006 and is housed in DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The mission is to promote implementation of Holocaust education and awareness programs in Missouri in order to encourage understanding of the Holocaust and discourage bigotry. Members are appointed by the governor with advice and consent from the Senate, and today there are 8 members serving. I am very pleased to share with you that we are working on some exciting new initiatives that will allow us to have a larger presence within the state and develop stronger relationships with other like-minded organizations. So on behalf of the commission, I want to express our gratitude to this museum for extending the invitation to participate in tonight's program. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters. Ariel Behrman is ADL's Director of Education Programs and Products. In this role, Ariel manages the strategic plan and distribution for anti-bias, anti-Semitism, campus and university, and Holocaust education programs and products in the ADL portfolio. Prior to this role, Ariel was the Director of Echoes and Reflections and played key roles in marketing and outreach efforts, program planning, online program development, and partnerships, resulting in a national Holocaust education program with a wide reach and impact. Jesse Tannetta is a former high school teacher and is the Operations and Outreach Manager for Echoes and Reflections, specializing in providing professional development to middle and high school teachers focused on Holocaust education throughout the United States. He holds bachelor's degrees in history and Catholic theology from Emmanuel College, as well as a master's degree in Holocaust and genocide studies from Gratz College. He is a current PhD student who is just beginning his dissertation analyzing the life of concentration camp guard Hermine Bronsteiner Ryan. Originally from the Boston area, he now resides in New York City.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here today. Thanks for extending the invitation. As Dee Dee mentioned, I've been at ADL a long time, but most of my career at ADL, which is now 14 years, it was 14 years this past week, has been in Holocaust education, working on the Echoes and Reflections program. Holocaust education is very important to me, to my core. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and so I've really dedicated my career to to Holocaust education and furthering the mission of ADL's Holocaust education work. But it's not only important to me, it's important to our country and our world. And I'm here today to talk about the vital need for Holocaust education. So give me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay. So I'm going to talk about why Holocaust education is so important in today's world. There are several reasons, and I'll get into that, but Holocaust education has become a central component of ADL's legislation and education work. It has also been a focus of legislative work in states across the country and even nationally, and has a really big impact, or can have a really big impact on our students. So one of our educators at Echoes and Reflections shared that the lasting lessons of the Holocaust are found in countless social issues unfolding in the world today. So not only am I going to talk about the need for Holocaust education, what our world looks like, and why we need to bring in Holocaust education, but also why Holocaust education matters to the students that we reach. So we're in a challenging climate. Here are, kind of the reasons why Holocaust education is essential. ADL monitors anti-Semitic incidents. ADL's been doing this since 1979, and there is an alarming rate of anti-Semitic incidents being reported across the country. In 2020, which is our most recent report, there were over 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents. This represents a 4% decrease from the previous year, but this is the third highest number on record of reported incidents. 327 of these incidents took place at Jewish institutions. So that's Jewish community centers, Jewish schools, and that is actually a big increase from the previous year. When we look at non-Jewish pre-K to 12 schools, the number of reported incidents have dropped, and the same in colleges and universities, but that number still remains high. And again, these are the incidents that are reported to ADL. Young people today are exposed to anti-Semitic images and media outside of the classroom. So even though good education is hopefully happening in the classroom, there is a lot of exposure to violence and media outside of the classroom in social media and in their communities. And then finally, time is passing since the Holocaust, and the ability to hear from firsthand accounts from Holocaust survivors, which we know is something that's really, really important, and I'll touch on a little bit more later, is passing. So now is the time to bring Holocaust education into our schools. So here's a little bit about the landscape where you all are in Missouri. So 3 anti-Semitic incidents have been reported in Missouri. Of the 2,000, only 3 in Missouri. So good news there. And the Claims Conference put out a study of millennials and Gen Z. And I'm going to go into the details of that in just a minute. But there were some results of that survey that showed that in Missouri, 45% of millennials and Gen Z have seen Holocaust denial and distortion on social media and online, and 59% of those surveyed have seen Nazi symbols in their communities and on social media in the last 5 years alone. So that's what we're seeing. That's what exists in your community. So here's that survey that I was talking about. So this came out of the Claims Conference in September of last year. And as the title suggests, the results really were very shocking. And it found that young people couldn't answer some very basic questions about the Holocaust. So the results actually can be broken down by state, which is really interesting. And if you go to claimsconference.org/millennial study, you can play around with this map and get some of the results from wherever you're interested, both on a national scale and on a more local scale. And here's kind of where Missouri fell. So in terms of those who can't name a concentration camp or a ghetto, that was at 50%. 8% of respondents in Missouri believe that Jews caused the Holocaust, and 64% did not know that 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. But again, this interactive map is available to anyone and can be accessed there. So what's being done about that? I've shared kind of the lay of the land and the layout of what's happening that really requires us to respond and to educate about the Holocaust and what's being done about it. In my world, what I'm seeing and what you all are seeing, I'm sure, is that there's an increased awareness on the need for Holocaust education, but also civic engagement in education, anti-bias education, and different kinds of learning that support a healthy democracy. There's other good news. There was a claims conference survey conducted in 2018, and those results were largely supported in the 2020 study, which was that respondents do believe that young people should learn about the Holocaust. So 93% of respondents, that's huge, believe that that students should learn about the Holocaust in school. And then 80% said it's important to teach about the Holocaust so it doesn't happen again. And then when talking to young people from the 2020 study, millennials and Gen Z, that group believed that Holocaust education should be required in schools. And again, we can zoom in locally by state. And so 85% of respondents, higher than that national average of 64%, 85% of respondents in Missouri believed that Holocaust education should be required in schools. We've counted 18 states that have Holocaust education mandates. Several of these came on just in the last legislative session. And there are other states that recommend Holocaust education, have references to Holocaust education and standards, and in their curriculum, and of course, the Holocaust Commission in Missouri. And then early in 2020, the Never Again Education Act was passed on a federal level, which empowers USHMM to distribute Holocaust education across the country. But what's I think most meaningful there is that Holocaust education becomes front and center and was talked about on a national level as being critical. So at the same time as this millennial study came out, September of 2020, within a week or two of each other, Echoes and Reflections put out a survey with the support of researchers at University of Southern California and an outside research firm to study the impact of Holocaust education in high school on college students. So we surveyed 1,500 college students to find out how Holocaust education had an impact on them on different measures. So here's just some examples. This is a fully, we have a summary report available on the Echoes and Reflections website. So I hope you'll check it out, because it really does show that Holocaust education does make a difference and have an impact on young people's behaviors. So those who were surveyed were much more likely to challenge incorrect or biased information. They were likely to challenge intolerant behavior in others, stand up to negative stereotyping, and then also they were less likely to do nothing in a bullying scenario. So they acted more on behalf of their peers and stood up for others. And I think this really says a lot. The most impactful measure was in response to survivor testimony. So that really was the most meaningful to those who were surveyed and had made the biggest difference and the biggest change. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what ADL does with Holocaust education and Echoes and Reflections, and what ADL's role is in working with schools and communities around what I've shown is a very important and relevant topic. Echoes and Reflections is a partnership of ADL, USC Shoah Foundation, and Yad Vashem, each bringing unique expertise to the table in the development and keeping the program updated. Each organization has its own contribution and really powerful contributions in the field. So through this collaborative effort, this ongoing collaborative effort, Echoes and Reflections is able to provide educational materials, content, and professional learning to support teachers to bring Holocaust education into their classroom and to their students. So Echoes and Reflections is entirely open access. Educators can come to Echoes and Reflections to gain classroom-ready lessons, to access an interactive timeline that they can use with their students, and to engage in professional development like webinars, online courses. In 2020, which was of course a challenging year for us all, Echoes and Reflections was able to adapt and bring a lot of things online and still have an impact in schools and communities. But since 2005, bringing it back to where you all are, Echoes and Reflections has sponsored 34 programs in Missouri, reaching 815 Missouri educators who represent 250 schools across the state. And here's just a little more information about kind of our cumulative reach. Echoes and Reflections was founded in 2005 and works with educators across the country, and will continue to do so and reach more and more schools and students and educators to address this vital need. Now I'll hand things over to Jesse.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ariel. So I'm just going to jump in and share my screen. And again, my name is Jesse Tannetta. I'm the Operations and Outreach Manager here at Echoes and Reflections. And so, sorry, I can put my camera on too so you can see what I'm doing here. So hi. Thank you, Ariel, for that. I want to just kind of take you through a little bit of our website, of a couple of activities for those of you that are in the classroom, or for those of you really involved with your students learning, and just kind of give you a little bit of a taste of what Echoes and Reflections has in terms of resources and approach. And so no matter what we're doing, we always start with our pedagogy, right? This is a very sensitive topic. It's very important that we teach it well, that we teach it responsibly, and also that we teach it effectively. And so we're always thinking about these principles of pedagogy, and they really need to be centered in our learning. And as we kind of think about this, just a couple to highlight today about ensuring a supportive learning environment, right? These are really difficult topics, and And that's something that we have to be wary of our students, and we'll kind of lean into the social emotional learning today as well. Encouraging critical thinking, as Ariel brought up with the studies that have shown how Holocaust education increases critical thinking in our students. But today we're really going to focus on teaching the human story, right? Stories are what grab us. They're what it gets us interested. It's what teaches us. And so that's what our big focus will be on today. And I just want to introduce you to a tool called the Pyramid of Hate that chances are that you've seen somewhere down the line if you've done anything with us with Echoes and Reflections or with ADL. And here, you know, the idea of a pyramid, as you crawl up the pyramid, it gets you know, gets worse. It gets more intimidating, gets eventually violent, perhaps. And just a thought about, you know, and each one of these steps that we see in our communities that our students see, you know, what could we have done at that step to change something? What could we have done to try and stop some of the escalation of hate? And so I want to kind of just jump you right into you know, developing and fostering empathy through testimony. So I want to take you to our website here. Again, as Ariel mentioned, everything is open sourced, everything is online. And here's our website, echoesandreflections.org. We're going to go to the Teach tab over here so that you have some time to explore at another date. But the Teach tab is where you'll see our lesson plans here on the left. And we're actually going to jump right into our timeline of the Holocaust here, which is just a really awesome tool. 1933 to 1945, you know, detailing the rise of Nazism. Of course, the Holocaust also includes non-Jewish victims as well of Nazi oppression and persecution. And for each one of these dates, we're going to look at April 1st, 1933 here. And each one of these dates will have several assets in it. You might have some historical photographs, some propaganda images, but we're going to jump right into testimony here. One of my favorite testimonies here is Otto Hertz. Otto Hertz is born in 1903 in Germany. He has a brother, Paul, that is eventually going to save him. He's going to detail April 1st, 1933, but he was also arrested during Kristallnacht, sent to Dachau, and was able to escape. And I want you to just listen to his 1-minute testimony here. And instead of kind of looking for content necessary, I want you to just read his emotions. So really just kind of lean into that emotional. What kind of emotions do you notice? You know, voice intonations, his body language. And we're going to open up the chat and just listen to Otto tell his story for just a minute here. And in the chat box, just some of the emotions that you notice.
The 1st of April 1933 was the boycott ordered by the Nazi government. All Jewish stores had to be they put Nazi SS and Nazi brown uniforms before the Jewish stores in order that people could not go into the stores. So they boycotted the Jewish stores on the 1st of April 1933. And that was also one of those humiliation days.
Did somebody boycott your store?
Yeah, people were afraid to come in. A few people who were of Dutch nationality, they didn't mind.
So that's Otto here. And so just in the chat box, just make sure that you have it set to everyone. What are some of the emotions that you notice from Otto? Any body language or voice intonations? What are some of the emotions that come out in this 1-minute clip? Yeah, he's really uncomfortable, right? You can start that part of fear as well. He's nervous, sadness. Good, thank you. Some kind of tears in his eyes. Some hesitation, he's looking away. It still makes him uncomfortable. Thank you, Megan. Yeah, like he does the kind of scratch on the neck and turns away, right? Scarred, good, it's a good word. Embarrassed, right? He uses that term humiliation, right? So that, you know, this isn't the physical punishment. This wasn't necessarily violence, but that humiliation that stuck with him all of these years. Good, good, awesome. And so, you know, again, this is something that we know from studies, and we know from being in the classroom, that students connect to stories, and they connect to survivors who tell their stories, and it's so powerful. And so in this little clip, you know, I can tell you all about the April 1st, 1933 boycott. And in this 1 minute, you get all the emotions of it. You have that more, it's just more impactful, and it also fosters empathy in students to connect to the survivors and telling their story, right? Good, awesome. One of my favorite things to do with this that we're a little bit short on time today, because I want to jump into something else, is, you know, we always think about, why didn't someone do something? Why didn't people stop what was happening? And here you get this story from Otto that you can ask the next question, or a different question, which is, what did the average German benefit from this persecution of the Jews, from this discrimination, right? And if you think about that, you know, what about the store next to Otto that was owned by a German and their business grew, right? What about the people in office buildings, and lawyers and doctors and judges and regular everyday people that were given promotions and raises because the Jews and their professions were kicked out or isolated from society? So again, another one of those things, when using the pyramid, using testimony, you can kind of start asking those really probing questions. Awesome. And so with our units, you know, this is something that we also kind of want to have students think about is, okay, you watch this testimony, you have a summary of kind of what happened, what was described by Otto. We looked at his emotions, again, really leaning into that social emotional learning, but also making sure that students recognize their own emotions, right? And having this kind of third question too is a really great reflective question, and really important. And as we think about that, ensuring a safe learning environment, is having students reflect about how do they feel after handling these testimonies that can be really, really heavy. So thank you so much in the chat. I want to do one more thing. Again, we're all about teaching the human story today, which is really hopefully kind of a huge focus, and should be a focus, right? And I want to just do something with artifacts, right? You know, when we think about students, and we think about how they connect and what they connect with, we often think about items, right? And whether they're materialistic or not. No matter what, and I've done this in my own classrooms, you ask for a student what's their most prized possession, and you get wonderful answers, right? And so I want to highlight one of these. So these are artifacts that are found in our units, or are found in Yad Vashem, one of our partners. I want to highlight this bottom right one. The others are kind of self-explanatory, or you can kind of look for yourself. A comb, a prayer book, a photograph that was carried by a husband. Those 3 items were for Auschwitz. The Monopoly game board was from Theresienstadt to teach children about where to go in the ghetto and where not to go. But this bottom one is really interesting. So this is a birthday card that was made in Auschwitz by 2 victims to a 3rd victim. And we actually know the names of 2 of them that gave the card, but we don't know who the birthday boy is. But in this picture, or in this card, this birthday card, it has depictions from the birthday boy's life. Has him growing up, has what his father was doing, and even has pictures of them together in Auschwitz as prisoners. And so opening up the chat again to everyone, this question here, what do you learn from this birthday card that can kind of teach you about humanity, or can teach you about resistance, or can teach you about this kind of human story? You know, why is this birthday card given to, you know, someone's birthday in Auschwitz? What can this artifact teach us about human beings? Hope. Thank you, Peggy. Right. So there's still this hope. There's still caring. This semblance of normalcy, of normality, right? That giving a birthday card is so simple. Compassion. Thank you. Something to make you happy, or still expressing emotions, right? That emotions are part of the human experience, right? Resistance, that you continue to celebrate being alive, and in these aspects that, even in these kind of desperate circumstances, you can think about, handing this birthday card, right? And the joy of that, right? Remembering your personal past, relationships. Thank you, Sandra, right? So from the names that were written on the card, we found who two of the boys were that gave this birthday card. They were from two totally different countries. One was from France, or I believe France, but at least Western Europe. The other was from Central Europe. They didn't speak the same language, but these three boys formed a relationship, formed a friendship, talked about their lives, told them about their past and what their life was like, right? They did not know each other before being there. And so not only did they, create bonds, or if you think of the famous stories, like of Night, with the father and son being so important in that story, that humans remained social, remained humans, and even in this. And so something that's kind of really special, and that also, have to highlight that this is against the rules, that this related, the punishment for this birthday card was death, whether it was the paper or the ink and the pencils that were used to make it, or to possess it, right? All of those were punishable by death. And so I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a taste of what Echoes and Reflections has, and how we kind of approach this. And this also includes kind of handling and and pivoting in the times of, there's the tab I was looking for, with current events, with top educational practices and pedagogy, and that includes, this virtual year that we've had. And so I just wanted to show you something that I've used in some trainings, and teachers have used. This is a tool called Padlet, and it does the same thing that we kind of did just now, but just to give you kind of a little example of a new age way that you can engage with students with these really powerful artifacts, but also leaning into that social aspect, that students can interact with each other, that can be done outside of the classroom. And so that's kind of what I wanted to kind of leave you here, is this idea of, if you had looked at that Padlet, about students kind of putting in their own personal artifacts, and then learning stories of people who risk their lives for things, and understanding that things make us who we are, and that they're an essential part of humanity, and really highlighting those stories of human beings. And so, as I can remember, a student would almost always say that their most prized possession is their phone, and you'd be like, well, of course they're always on it, but the phone is what connected them to their friends and to their family, and into the world. And so those reasons are relevant, and in a way that students really can connect to these things. So that's what I have, just to kind of give you a little taste of our of our resources, of our approach. And I will hand it back over to Q&A, which I'm pretty excited about. So thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Jesse and Ariel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Helen Turner, and I'm the Director of Education and Interpretation at the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, and I'll be taking us through the question and answer portion of this evening. So thank you so much for that wonderful, thoughtful, and insightful presentation from both of you. I'm a big fan of both of your organizations. I'd love to see some of those statistics and also some of the work that you're doing. But as we move into the question and answer, I do want to encourage our participants out there that you can please put any of your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. But I'm going to kick us off with a question for both of you, and I'm going to start with Ariel first. If you could please let us know sort of why Holocaust education matters to you in this moment.
Well, to me personally, a Holocaust education matters because it's something that I want to devote my career to, and something that I think is really important for young people to understand, for the purpose of its history and for its lessons and its meaning today. My personal connection is a family connection, and so that's what brought me to this work. but I do think that the Holocaust can be relevant and meaningful to someone who doesn't have that personal connection. And moving forward and into the future, that personal connection is really not going to exist for most people, sadly. Even my children won't have that in the same way that I do. And so to be able to find what connects people to those lessons and to that history, I think is kind of the mission behind the work that I want to do in this area, and what really can be achieved by Holocaust education.
Certainly, thank you very much. And Jesse, same question.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, if you listen to my introduction an hour ago or a half hour ago, it was I have degrees in history and in Catholic theology, which is odd. But the reason I got so interested in the Holocaust was I think that it really is that perfect blend of religion, spirituality, however you want to define that, and history, because there are so many questions about morality, about human beings, about their connection to their creator or to a higher purpose or whatever, to their connection to each other. And we often have that rallying cry of never again, but I think that the Holocaust really teaches so much more than that. It really teaches those critical thinking skills. It makes you think about morality and question the world. And I think all of those things are beneficial, but also essential to what it is to be human, is to have those huge questions. And I think it is just a vehicle to learn so much more than just its history.
Very true, very true. So with that kind of framework in mind about the importance of Holocaust education, which I think we're all on the same page with here, even though we might come to it from different approaches, we've got some wonderful questions for you all in the chat. So our first question is, how can a single instructor generate support for their course from a reluctant school administration? So I'm wondering, I looked at either of you, if whoever wants to take the question, but any advice for our teachers out there?
Jesse is recently in the classroom. I'm going to say he's recently in the classroom forever, because more recent than me, who's never actually physically taught in a classroom. So Jesse, over to you.
Yeah, I think that we find this in schools is that a teacher finds a topic that's really important to them and is invigorated by that topic and teaches it in a special way, in a way that students can feel. And when students can feel it and they're talking about it and it builds momentum in a school, administration finds that too. And there are, like, I think it goes back to what I just said as my first answer to your first question, is that that's what a school is looking for, right? They want students engaged. They want them critically thinking. They want them to go beyond the books and the curriculum and the check boxes that need to be taught. And a teacher that is passionate about this subject wins their faculty over, wins their administration over by teaching the subject. So there's so many connections that you can make to Holocaust history, whether it's you're teaching American history or teaching morality or teaching sociology or psychology. A teacher that wants to bring in Holocaust education and lessons can do that. And if they do it in a passionate and a powerful way, it makes a difference. We know it makes a difference, and the students will know, and administration will notice, and and a good administration will back good teachers. And I think that's, and if you're a teacher that's in a bad administration, then those administrations usually lose teachers, and that's really sad. And so I think an administration that empowers a teacher to teach what they love and something that is so beneficial will continue to have it, will grow the program and expand that. And that's what I've seen. And I'm sure Ariel could back that up in her experience, that a great teacher that's really empowered to teach what they love will do so.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree. And if I may, I would also say to whomever asked the question, and to all of our teachers who might be on the Zoom this evening, you're not alone. You have two phenomenal resources who are here with you this evening. Also, the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum, we're here as a resource for you as well. So if you need some support, you need some maybe motivation or someone to chat with, I'm sure all three of us would be here as a resource for you. So our next question is, again, looking at the classroom. And it says, how young should Holocaust education start? Does a child being Jewish versus not being Jewish change the age at which they need to start learning?
I think I would love Ariel's thoughts about this, as I'm not Jewish, but I would really caution under 4th grade, and I think that I think 4th grade can be awful young as well. I just think it requires so much care and so much tact that I think you're really questioning and having a difficult time to connect with students that are younger than that to be able to understand that this is a really bad thing that happened, or how to do that. I think is really challenging. And I think it's also dangerous to only teach one narrative to a younger group that may lose it, right? So we could teach rescue and resistance to grades younger than that. But if that's what they think that the Holocaust was, that there are people everywhere rescuing, then they have a warped history of it as well. And so I don't think that is beneficial either. So if you had to make me pick a grade, I guess no younger than 4th, but even then it's odd. It's uncomfortable to me.
Yeah. And I think, in for 4th grade, 5th grade, there's like really some serious adaptations required to how you approach teaching about the Holocaust. You're teaching it maybe thematically, and really having those conversations about, different themes related to the Holocaust, but not necessarily the readings and the testimonies and the history. In terms of Jewish students, I actually, in my experience, I've actually seen Jewish day schools be even more cautious about when they bring in Holocaust education, and not bring it in until like middle school. Whereas in some public schools, I've seen I've seen earlier grades. So I agree with Jesse. I have a 7-year-old who asks questions about what I do for work. And I talk to her about it. And I have to be really careful about what I say, but I'm trying to approach that, but she's quite young to understand.
Yeah, thank you. So our next question goes off of something that I came up in Ariel's statistics, but there's a second part to it that I think is a curious discussion. So the question is, how many states mandate Holocaust education? And I think we said 18 with 2 pending. We've got Arkansas in 2022, and I think it's Maine in 2023. But then why is there no national mandate? And I think that is a very curious question. If the two of you would like to tackle it.
So in May, I think it was, of 2020, the Never Again Education Act was actually passed. And that is, it's not a mandate. It's different than what you see in individual states, which lays out exactly how it is that a teacher should be teaching and what type of support that teacher gets. The Never Again Education Act put Holocaust education in kind of the national narrative, at least to those who are paying attention. I was paying attention. And really, I think empowers education institutions to deliver that Holocaust education. It names the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum as kind of the distributor of that information. But empowers them also to create partnerships on the ground and to really work with other organizations to distribute Holocaust education. So while it's not a mandate, it's not a requirement of everyone in the country at a certain grade level to teach about the Holocaust. It really does say Holocaust education is important, it's critical, it has these outcomes, and we want to provide funding and empowerment for a large organization to be leading the distribution of Holocaust education across the country.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, yeah. Our next question is, what impact do you think anti-CRT, so critical race theory, legislation might have on Holocaust education?
I'll start, Jesse, if you have anything to add. I think you can add it. I think that most of any pushback, at least in ADL's work, against ADL's work, including Holocaust education, but also anti-bias education, is really going to be the perception of what it is. that we do. I think that what's first and foremost most critical is to be very open about what it is that an education organization approaches and how they approach it. In the work that Echoes and Reflections does, we work directly with individual educators for the most part. We work, of course, with partner organizations to deliver Holocaust education to individual educators. But in most cases, in our online work, it's up to the individual educator to decide if they're going to participate in our programs, if they're going to use our resources and pull our resources, and they have control over how they implement those resources in the classroom. So whatever they're facing in terms of their ability to bring in various topics into the classroom, they can, of course, work around it, which is not the answer, right? But they can choose how they utilize the materials and how they enhance their own learning and understanding of the topic. Like I shared, like Jesse shared, like really the connecting points and the relevance of Holocaust education is very important. And if you take a close look, you might find that there is reason according to this anti-CRT legislation that one might push back in the law. So that's where I see it, particularly as it relates to how we do it with Echoes and Reflections, but also just generally Holocaust education and how people find Holocaust education resources and programming.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have anything to add. I think it just puts a bigger burden on teachers as they plan out their Holocaust education units and try to get students involved with it, that they have to be extra careful in some states about the discussions that go on in their classroom, which is unfortunate, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be something that cuts Holocaust education off at the knees or anything like that. I think if anything, it'll show how important this topic is, as we're seeing with more states passing legislation and the Never Again Education Act. It's clear that this education works, that it's needed, that teachers need support in teaching it. And I think that momentum will continue regardless of what goes on with the CRT debate.
Certainly. So another question, and I think this might be a little bit more up Jesse's avenue, but we'll see. It says, an item in an earlier slide indicated that one goal is to make Holocaust education relevant. Could you please give an example of how you might achieve this in the course of a lesson?
Yeah, it's all about, the way that we learn is that we take information that we know already, and then we compare it to what we're learning currently. That's how students learn, that's how they make connections, and that's how they figure it out. And I think that the important part of making Holocaust education relevant is to make those connections. So we're not making comparisons, we're not, it's not the misery Olympics to see who suffered more, but to try and understand why systems of government, why othering, why dehumanization, discrimination, like how those things come to be in our society. And by using a historical example, especially in the US, we're a little bit detached from, we're not in Europe, we're not, it's not part of our direct history, although we certainly have plenty of intersecting points. Like, how did that system break down? How does democracy break down in this country? What's the impact of propaganda? What's the impact of mass media, which, although very different than it is today, all of those connecting points is really important to have students start understanding and actually recognizing and slowing down in their processes of what's going on in the world around them, or the other histories that they have learned. I think students also often have a difficult challenge to recognize time differences, that, there are people that lived through the Holocaust and World War II that are still alive today. My great-grandfather had Civil War veterans come talk to him in elementary school. And I think so having those connections for students, we talk about timelines, having a student create their personal timeline of their family's history, and then putting that in a classroom that is talking about a different historical time, is a way that students can connect and be like, oh my goodness, like I didn't know this, or, whether that's part of their personal history, whether it's something that they've seen online or they're slowing down and consuming the media that they are. I think there's lots of those points, but the important thing for educators is to make those connections, but to make sure that we keep the Holocaust in its historical context and in its reality, that it's different. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn from it and learn and change or better the situations that we're in today, or in understanding things that have happened in other historical periods as well.
Mhm. Lovely. We have another question that's more geared towards echoes and reflections, I think. We've got someone asking, they're doing a presentation, and they want to know, can I present echoes and reflections as a place that a general audience could consult, or is it geared towards teenagers?
It's certainly open access, and there's some good readings and articles and useful resources like the timeline, different handouts. It's written and intended for an educator audience to bring to their students, but certainly useful generally.
Lovely. Our next question, which I think is kind of relevant to the other topic we've already discussed, but it's a bit more specific. It says, what pushback have you heard about from parents who did not want Holocaust education taught to their children? This person, I think, is thinking about racial equity discussions that are being proposed today. So once again, sort of taking it back to that topic, but I'm also wondering if you could expand a little, if you have heard of any pushback from people not wanting their children to be taught Holocaust education, and why that might be, and what you do to address that.
I'm not so as on the ground as Jesse is, and so maybe Jesse has more to contribute. Most of what I've heard is about like age appropriateness and the pushback there from parents of a classroom that might be viewing a film that is perceived as too violent or too graphic. But that's what I've encountered. Jesse?
Yeah, I think that's a huge one, especially if we're thinking about middle school and that kind of those ages of 6th grade to 8th grade. I think that the real pushback that we might see is why this history and not something else. I think that we said there's plenty of genocides that you can teach as the numbers increase and more genocides occur, including today. And so, I think that the idea and even we have this discussion and these kind of differing opinions in Holocaust education as well about the term. Do we only talk about Jews? Do we talk about non-Jewish victims? How do we talk about them? How do we talk about, Poland is obviously going through Poles were victims, but they also could be perpetrators. They could be rescuers, and maybe not being so black and white on there. But I think that there is plenty to learn. Is one that there's plenty to learn, and two, just those universal applications. And this works. Like I would always go back to that the studies are there that this works. That by learning the Holocaust in a really in-depth and special way, you can learn more about those other aspects of history, genocides and non-genocides, and and all of those kinds of topics. So I think that there's always a push to teach my history or something to that effect. But I think that especially if we're thinking of racial equity and if we're thinking about the history of the United States, and especially if we think about the relationship of the United States with Native American people, learning history in depth from a place a little bit further away will actually give us a lot more insight into learning our own history, and give us some of those tools to really critically think and apply and analyze in a way that maybe we're not, we haven't done a very good job of so far. Because it's a little bit too personal for us to admit guilt. So maybe learning the Holocaust will actually open up those doors to those broader discussions and those more universal applications and learnings and reckoning as well. So I think just plenty of good reasons.
Now I'm going to move us to our final question, which is very ADL specific. It says, for as long as I can remember, ADL has provided outstanding programs for the St. Louis area in schools and communities. but your Heartland office recently closed. How do you plan to continue to support these important programs?
Well, I'm happy to say it hasn't really closed. It's just not staffed right now. There is an acting regional director, but you're right. There's really is not a lot of activity coming out of the office that covers, or that was out of St. Louis, right? That covers Missouri and ADL is engaged in a divisional structure where Missouri is part of the Southern Division. And so there are a lot of education staff. So programs like No Place for Hate, which existed at some level prior to the office being unstaffed, will continue to exist in this coming school year. Echoes and Reflections is primarily administered nationally, so from a centralized, I'm going to centralized in quotes because we're all over the place now, centralized location. So not really contingent on a regional office, and so a lot of the work can still be done. We're working on, from a larger ADL perspective, really distributing many more opportunities for engagement across all program areas at ADL through digital activities and online learning. And so really, things aren't as contingent on a physical office. And I do hope that the Heartland office comes back, but really, there really are plans for, growth and distribution and impact across the country from a more centralized location, and making sure that there's access to all.
Lovely, thank you very much. So I do want to say thank you both so much for your wonderful presentation and your thoughtful answers to some difficult questions. We really appreciate you being here with us tonight. So thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
I'm now going to take us into our conclusion. And in preparing for the conclusion to this program, I too spent quite some time grappling with the larger question of why Holocaust education matters. It is a question I constantly face as the Director of Education of a Holocaust Museum. And my answer often comes to me in the form of a shoe. In both the former museum and in the new museum, there will sit a child's shoe. It is small and it is fragile, and it comes from Auschwitz. Based on the size and the location the shoe was discovered in, we can estimate that this young person was in all likelihood murdered. And no matter how much research I conduct, or interviews I watch, or books I read, I will never know the name of this person. I will never know the story of their short life, the sports they enjoyed, or the books they read. Their life was taken because of the idea that they were different, evil, to be feared instead of nurtured. For me, that child's story is why this matters. We are here to preserve the memories of those who survived and speak out for those who perished. This history was not so long ago and not so far away. It happened to people like you and I. So when we ask, why does this matter? It matters because this is a history of human suffering, of human failure to act and react in the face of hatred. It matters because if we do not learn the lessons of the Holocaust, to stand up and speak out in the face of bias, hatred, and intolerance in all of its manifestations, we allow these things to proliferate our society and hurt and harm our fellow humans. Holocaust education is about teaching students, adults, police, professionals from all walks of life about the power of their choices and to empower them to choose each other, to choose to stand up and speak out, and to constantly move towards the declaration of never again. The St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum is a powerful voice and resource in that declaration, providing tours, Holocaust and descendant speakers, and powerful programming across the state, both virtually and in person. So why does this matter? It matters because this is our story, yours, mine, ours. And together, through education, we can honor the survivors, and remember the victims as we all work to build a brighter tomorrow. So with that, I will conclude our program. Thank you so much to our guest speakers, Dee Simmons, Ariel Behrman, and Jesse Tannetta. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us virtually tonight. We so appreciate your support. And please be sure to tune in next week, Thursday, August 19th at 6:30 for continuation of Why This Matters, for a timely discussion on media literacy. And I believe the link is going to appear in the chat so that you can go and register now. So thank you so much for joining us. Be well and be safe. Good night.